How do you feel about the United States' response to Syria, specifically announcing that the U.S. will take in 6,000 to 8,000 Syrian refugees?
Well, that response by the U.S. is, of course, a part of the overall response by our European allies and NATO. It is a situation in which, because Syria is chaotic, Iraq is chaotic, that people from both countries are leaving in large numbers. Now, they've been going by and large to Jordan and to Lebanon. We've read about that, but it really hasn't affected us. Not until they began to come through Turkey and to Hungary, and then Austria, and then Germany, and so forth, that the European leaders are meeting, trying to decide how to parcel out the hundreds of thousands of people on a per capita basis or on what basis. And so finally, of course, they come and say, what if you folks in the United States prepared to do? Well, thus far, not very much. It takes a while for Syrians or Iraqis or others to get across the Atlantic Ocean to the United States. But nevertheless, in a humanitarian way, we've decided, I gather, as a nation to try to take in some of these refugees.
How should the United States be responding to Iran in the meantime?
Well, we should be responding to Iran by indicating that we are going to be over there with at least the international inspectors, and we expect them to get rid of the materials, the highly enriched uranium. We're going to demand that that occur before we lift sanctions and make life more easy for the Iranians. Eventually, of course, there is a hope that Iran might be more cooperative with the United States and other nations. And this is particularly true with regard, for instance, to the problems with ISIS in Syria or various problems in Iraq. It's a very complex business between Sunnis and Shiites. The Iranians are on the Shiite side of this situation. And there are, in fact, a good number of Shiite forces, militias in Iraq that have been helpful to the United States in fighting ISIS. It's a very strange combination, but that's the nature of the Middle East.
To switch gears a bit, let's talk about what you found in the bipartisan index.
Well, the bipartisan index was created with the help of Georgetown University, McCord School, and we took the voting records of every member of Congress for the last 10 years in the Senate and in the House. We have published the last year of voting to indicate two things. How often did members sponsor a piece of legislation on which they got some support, co-sponsors, from the opposite side of the aisle? Or how many times did people on the opposite side of the aisle reach over and co-sponsor a piece of legislation by some other party? And on that basis, we've established an index which shows 1 through 100 how senators stack up. Ditto for 1 to 435 in the House. Now, we have data for the last 10 years that show that the Congress has become more extremely partisan in the last two sessions, especially in this one in which we are now in. Our aim is to encourage members to at least deal with the people on the other side of the aisle, to do so with constructive legislation that has some chance of passing. If you have members on both sides of the aisle sponsoring and co-sponsoring. And so we're going to continue this. We'll have new publication of results that will show really the last 10 years in due course, quite apart from the last year. But this first sponsorship of the publicity has brought, of course, many stories from papers and radio and television stations and constituencies all over the country, asking their members, what about you? Why are you rated here and there and so forth? And so I like that idea that we're thinking, how can we do constructive work as opposed to gridlock, a Congress that 77% of the people feels ought to be kicked out altogether.
Well, and what is the short-term impact and also the long-term impact? Is there a potential danger to that partisanship?
Well, the people involved in the partisanship don't see a danger. They believe, maybe ardently, that the other side, whether it be Democrats or Republicans, are just absolutely wrong, that they're bad for the country, that they need to be stopped at every juncture and so forth. There's no colloquy, no conversation. As a result, nothing happens. The American public then condemns gridlock. We're now once again facing a situation in which there's talk of shutting down the government because the Congress can't agree even to kick the can down the road and at least let the same budget exist maybe the next year with an amendment or two. So it's a strange situation in which the American people are protesting the nature of the politicians that are now there. But the politicians are engaged in such partisanship that it's impossible for them to move anything.